16 billion passwords is staggering. From your perspective, what does this scale of breach tell us about the current state of enterprises today?
It's the latest, and the horrifying word there is latest, because there will be another one breach. Now they can just go out, they can take these data sources, they can take these packets of information for whatever company they're interested in out of that huge cache of data, and they can stand up complex campaigns very quickly, very cheaply. You don't need to know what you're doing to attack people with this stuff now. That's why when it's 16 billion, it's much scarier now than it would have been if that was 16 billion maybe 10 years ago, because people wouldn't know necessarily how to manipulate that data, how to leverage that data. Now it's so easy to do.
Welcome to Security Strategist, the podcast where we speak with leaders shaping enterprise cybersecurity and digital resilience. I'm your host, Trisha Pillay, and today we're tackling a critical issue for every security leader, and that is authentication. Recently, the latest data breach in history exposed 16 billion passwords tied to major platforms like Apple, Facebook, and Google. And Google has urged users to change their password, while the FBI warned of phishing scams. This breach reveals a harsh truth, and that's passwords, once our very first line of digital defense, are now a major vulnerability. Even the traditional multi-factor authentication can't stop sophisticated attacks. Individuals and businesses alike cannot continue relying on these inherently insecure and outdated authentication methods to protect themselves, their accounts, and precious data. To explore what this means for enterprise security and how organizations can respond, I'm joined by Nic Sarginson, Principal Product Manager at Yubico, a leader in phishing-resistant password authentication solutions. Welcome, Nic.
Hi, Trisha. Thank you very much for having me. Glad to be here.
Could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your role at Yubico?
I'm the Principal Product Manager for the YubiKey within Yubico. There is a lot more to Yubico than just the YubiKey, but that is primarily what we're known as for. My role, as you can imagine, is there's a lot of herding of cats, a lot of firefighting. But before I moved into the product role, I was in the solutions org. I was Principal Solutions Engineer for a number of years. I've been here 8 years. So I've had a very customer-focused role, externally focused role for a long time, and now I'm working on internal. So a lot of it is trying to, we're a hardware company at the core of it, is trying to see where the protocols we use, that we promote, that we've helped develop, help customers, how the key can help in the flows, how we can educate the industry. We're part of the FIDO Alliance, we're a founder member. We see it as a part of our job is to promote this thing, not just there to, please buy a bit of hardware from us. We're very invested in building that ecosystem out and building that awareness out and helping CISOs and the industry see how they can protect themselves. Before that, I started as a mere boy in the 80s when telephones still plugged into the wall and punch cards were still in my co-worker's memory. So I'd been around for a while and seen that progression from where passwords were just good enough to where we are now and what we're talking about today.
Thanks, Nic. That's quite an interesting journey. Let's start with the recent breach. 16 billion passwords is staggering. From your perspective, what does this scale of breach tell us about the current state of enterprises today?
It's the latest, and the horrifying word there is latest, because there will be another one breach. It is. It's for companies like ourselves, for companies that are focused on user security and identity more than anything these days. It's Groundhog Day for us. These things. This is a huge breach, and it's one of the few where even personally, I thought, right, I need to go out and change. But thankfully, I practice what I preach, and I have a lot of strong MFA around everything. But the size of it, the scale of it, you think, well, there must be an account of mine in there somewhere that I don't remember setting up. Maybe I set a Disney account up for my daughter years ago. Maybe I set a banking account up here that's still in there. So it is worrying because it's not just the scale of the data size is immense, but it's the fact it's so usable for the attackers now. They used to, gone are the days of movies where it's a hacker with a hoodie and lots of flashing lights behind them, and it takes them 10 months to do this complicated phishing scam. Now they can just go out, they can take these data sources, they can take these packets of information for whatever company they're interested in out of that huge cache of data, and they can stand up complex campaigns very quickly, very cheaply. You don't need to know what you're doing to attack people with this stuff now. That's why when it's 16 billion, it's much scarier now than it would have been if that was 16 billion maybe 10 years ago, because people wouldn't know necessarily how to manipulate that data, how to leverage that data. Now it's so easy to do. And the fact it is, like you say, it's just the latest. And it will have been, again, the reason we're here to talk about that, probably somewhere in there to get that cache of data was just a username and password that was used. Or very phishable MFA, an OTP, an email, some social engineering. So whilst enterprises are recognizing that this data is important now, they're still not ring fencing it. That's what we're seeing. It will have been. You can absolutely guarantee that at some point there'd be some social engineering or weak MFA was part of this breach, and the fact they can get that data out there. So it's worrying. It's worrying that we say this latest, and it's worrying the fact that there will be another one. You kind of know that's coming. So I think for the enterprises and personally, you have to take the view that it's going to be out there. Those websites that tell you whether your password has been compromised. My phone tells me that literally every password I've got that's just has been breached at some point. That's in this breach, that breach, the other breach. It's just a fact of life now. I think it's very worrying though, and the fact that enterprises let it happen. It's two ways. This is preventable by sticking decent security in, and there's no reason not to.
So it's clear that passwords are fundamentally broken, yet many organizations still rely on passwords, like you said, and even legacy multi-factor authentication, MFA. So to protect critical systems. But why do you think passwords and the traditional MFA remain so entrenched despite their known vulnerabilities?
Some of it is muscle memory. Some of it is, passwords are pretty much like Japanese knotweed, I think. They were a good idea at the time. And not that passwords were new when they came to computers. Ciphers and codes have been used for years, decades, millennium. And they work when there's that trust between the two parties and that trust doesn't get broken. We've gone way beyond that now. But that's so prevalent. Everything starts with username and password. It is the Japanese knotweed. It looked nice at the time, and now the roots are in. Every system, every security design, every developer will start, if it's going to be modeled with, we'll do username and password because that's the easiest way to do the identity and do some sort of exchange of secrets. So yeah, it's muscle memory that is so prevalent. We are so used to it. We expect it. MFA started, we started with the RSAs of the world, and then OTPs and SMSs, everything, and these all met a need, but they're not moving with the times. We used to have a tagline that some MFA is better than no MFA, but not all MFA is equal. And that's still the case. It is. Some MFA is better than no MFA. But the sophistication and the attack vectors have moved on from it just being OTP is pretty okay, because now we've got SIM swap, we've got hijacking, we can read about your emails, etc. So, the worrying thing is as well with all of this is we do an internal state of the nation kind of authenticated report survey every year, and we get about 20,000 responses, generally from employees. And some of the figures are quite worrying. We have I think for the work figures, we're looking at something like 50% of enterprises still rely on just username and password, which is quite scary. And then we get consumer accounts. I think it's a bit slightly better, which is weird these days, that about 60%, a bit worse, 68%, about 60% people still only use username and password for their personal accounts. That is slightly encouraging because it means we've got 40% of consumers, bearing in mind our respondent audience is probably more techie than general, that use MFA, even if it is OTP. It may be that it's forced on them, but the fact that nearly the same amount of personal accounts have the same level, if not better protection than corporate accounts, is a bit worrying. And there's no excuse in the corporate environment now not to do this. These things, the tech is there. So yeah, it's compatibility. Everybody starts using a password. It's familiarity. This is what we know. It used to be good enough, whatever. And I think there's maybe a fear of change or a view that moving off those methods is going to be overly costly, overly complex. And again, 5-10 years ago, yes, probably it was. There was a big rush. Passwordless suddenly became a buzzword for a couple of years and everybody dived in, and the normal gold rush happened where you had a lot of failed projects because they weren't thought out correctly, they weren't scoped correctly, they weren't managed correctly. And the tech wasn't there. The integration wasn't there. So I think there's all those things. It's like, well, using a password works. But what if somebody shares their password? Oh, they won't share their password. Of course they will share their password now, all the post-it things. So yeah, pretty much I think that's it. There's a lot of familiarity, muscle memory, very hard to take it out, and a little bit of fear of change sometimes, that this is going to be something that if I do it in my organization, it's going to go wrong. People are going to be upset. Let's stick with what we know, even if we know there could be a breach coming.
I think that's a great point, but let's shift gears and talk about solutions, right? You did touch on it briefly now, but what exactly are the device-bound passkeys or physical security keys, and how do they provide stronger protection compared to the traditional methods that enterprises have been doing?
So, device-bound passkeys. So there is an overarching term at the moment. We say passkeys. Now, like everything in tech, what started off fairly simple has got a little bit confused. So we have device-bound passkeys and we have synced passkeys or platform-based passkeys, whatever you want to call them. Where we started in this journey with FIDO and passkeys is purely with device-bound, which is what a YubiKey is. So device-bound is a passkey credential for yourself or for me that is on a single piece of hardware, and it can never leave that piece of hardware. So this is part of the protections and the phishing resistance it gives. I mean, flow is ever perfect. But the idea with a thing like a YubiKey, a security key from us, is that your credential gets created on the YubiKey, on the hardware, and it never leaves there. It stays there. It's generated there. It's used there. You have to have that physical piece of hardware with you. So somebody who's breached your username and password from those 16 billion that got announced, they're trying to log into my Outlook email or your Gmail or your online bank or whatever. They might have their username and password, but they've got to have that physical key with them and the PIN that goes to that physical key. So it's part of the protections. So this is what we do. Now, there are platform-bound and software-bound and syncable ones that offer, again, that phishing resistance, but what they don't do is offer the attestation of where it's coming from. If I have a credential, if I have a software passkey in my Android vaults or my iCloud, for instance, depending on how it's created, I could share it with anybody in the room who's got AirDrop. But it still gives you the phishing resistance. It doesn't give you the user presence and awareness and location part. So that's what physical security keys are. They're purpose-built, small USB form factor devices that have designated secure elements on them, and that's what they do. So if you look at guidance from NIST or some other bodies about assurance levels, if you want to get to the highest level of assurance for your authentication, it's always an external hardware device that's recommended. Now, it might be a smart card in some cases. It might be a FIDO token in other cases. So because what we're doing with them is that they up the level over standard MFA. Standard MFA is normally transposition-based. I get an OTP. I get an SMS. We're getting a lot better with push notifications, but it's still to the phone and devices. So we're doing there's an actual cryptographic challenge goes on between the keys and when you're doing FIDO. So it's not just the service provider proving that you are Trisha or I am Nick or saying, yeah, it's also the FIDO authenticator says, I know that service, and there's a transaction that goes on. The user knows none of this. All they see is a flashing light and enter a PIN, and it's a nice, easy user flow. But that's what they really do. So you can still build it into a password flow as a second step, but because you're still adding in that phishing resistance, you're still protecting the user. So you have to have that key. That credential only exists on that key. That key has to be bound to a service. The key will only respond to that service. It won't respond to Microsoft with an 8-bit 0 instead of an O, for instance. It won't, because it will say, well, this is not a service I'm bound to. And you have to prove you're physically there as well, to help take over from if there's a complete machine takeover, and you can have PIN. So there's a lot of protections in there that add to that phishing resistance.
So from your viewpoint, integrating new security methods into an existing identity infrastructure, often with legacy systems, is such a huge challenge for enterprises. What should security teams consider when planning to deploy physical security keys at scale?
There's a worry that I'm going to have to rip and replace, so I'm going to have to put new solutions in, new platforms in, new layers of abstraction from my IT teams. And again, 5-10 years ago, when FIDO itself was quite not as prevalent as it is now, that might have been the case. But so for me as a product manager for the YubiKey, one of the nerdy things that nobody gets when I go to a pub or something is where I go, do you know what? Every bit of IT kit in it, every phone, tablet, and computer in this place has FIDO in it. All the platforms are on board. So the tech is prevalent now in the platforms. So that makes it much easier for an organization to roll these things out. They don't necessarily have to rip and replace. They might still need an IDP or a central management platform for policy control, granularity, and all that kind of thing. But the authentication tech is there. That still doesn't mean you don't have to look at the integration and compatibility of things. It may be that you have a lot of legacy things in your environment. You just can't bolt MFA on any MFA onto, or it will only support OTPs, or it'll only support emails or something. Look at your phased rollouts. Get your internal evangelists who like tech and will help you iron out all the wrinkles of, the day-to-day use is probably the least part of the problem these days. It's how do I get involved? What happens when I lose it? That's a massive attack vector these days, is the recovery mechanisms, because it's all right having, I log onto my desktop and my Bitcoin accounts or whatever with a hardware security key. But the dog's eaten the key. I dropped it down a drain. What happens? We'll fall back to SMS. And don't, when rolling out, take that more legacy view that I will protect the C staff and the admins first and not worry about the guys in the warehouse.
I think those are really good points, and thank you for summing it up so well. But are there any real-world case studies showing measurable improvements in security or compliance after adopting physical security keys?
Well, customers don't like to talk about their security, which is one barrier to getting them to talk about it. But there's things out there. I mean, we, like everybody else, we commission our own studies. We did a Forrester Consulting study a while ago about the economic impact. And at scale, it was quite impressive. I mean, bearing in mind, these are reports. But we saw in some the actual return on investment and the exposure to, sorry, not the return on investment, but at least the exposure to credential theft could reduce by, up to 99.9%. You can never say 100%. And if you're a techie like myself, the 99.9, okay, 9.99999 recurring, but never quite 100%. So that was very good. There's been reports from Google over the years they're always very helpful because Google's massive, and they've been a massive supporter of FIDO over the years as well. This is a factor of how many phishing attempts and breaches and ransomware attacks there are out there now. The cyber insurance industry has gone up massively over the last few years. And we had a contact center specialist called Anthony, who they went out for their cyber insurance premiums. They went up, as they always do every year. These things never come down. And what they did is say, well, hang on, to their broker, you've specified we need to use MFA. We are using MFA, and we're using phishing-resistant MFA. Why is our premium still going up? Oh, well, you just have to have MFA. We tell you have to do that. And they engaged with their broker, had them in, showed them what they were doing with YubiKeys and why that was better than just standard MFA. And I think they got a reduction around 30% on their insurance premiums. And they've published that. So that's another good one. And that was kind of unexpected. We don't really think about that too much, that it can have that kind of secondary effect on these ancillary businesses that are around IT now. But then again, 15, 20 years ago, as a large organization, we would have had some form of IT security. But now even SMEs and small businesses have to go out and get cyber threat insurance. And if you can reduce your premiums, that's brilliant. It doesn't work with my car insurance. I tried that, but certainly for cyber insurance, it's a thing. So yeah, those things are out there. The measurable studies there, and the fact that I think it's always telling that in those breach reports, the MFA that was used is always going to be SMS or OTP or push. It's never been a security key or a FIDO or a passkey solution so far.
Well, with regulatory pressures mounting, are you seeing frameworks begin to support or require phishing resistance methods? What should security leaders be watching out for?
Yeah, it goes back again to like the cyber insurance example there. They are. So DORA, NIS, EIDAS, PSD2, all these things, PCI, they will all pretty much now mandate strong MFA. And then it's up to you to decide sometimes in these frameworks what strong MFA is. Some of them are more prescriptive. EIDAS is quite good. EIDAS go down like the identity assurance levels and AA levels that the kind of NIST have pioneered, and they do different risk assessments and assurance levels. You know, if you're low assurance, this is fine. You know, maybe push notification to up is fine. If you want high assurance, then you should use an external hardware authenticator, be that a smart card, be that a security key, etc. So there is a big move there. Some of it you can see is just kind of lip service to, we must say you must use strong authentication. And some is you can see that those frameworks have thought about things a lot more. NCSC in the UK, which is a government advisory body that advises businesses and government, they've just recently published that they recommend moving to a FIDO-based strategy and a passkey-based strategy, and UK Gov will be leading that way. Which is nice to see. Over the other side of the pond in America, we had the White House executive orders about that if you deal with federal government the other year, that you must have a zero trust policy in place by now, and you can only use phishing-resistant authentication, which they define as external smart cards, because that's a massive amount in federal government over there, and also external hardware FIDO keys, which is really great. So we see it's coming. Sometimes it's very, very specific. Sometimes it's very broad. You must have multi-factor authentication and so forth. But yeah, there is a big shift to it. And I'll say, if we can see with the cyber insurance industry that they are again getting very prescriptive about which ones give you the best deals, then that's flowing into that national schemes, into the international regulatory frameworks as well.
So as we wrap up, looking ahead, do you expect passwordless to become a default for enterprises? Or what role do you think security strategists play in accelerating this shift? So just to wrap up this whole conversation, what are your key takeaways?
I don't think there's any doubt that it will. There's a little bit of a false start. We'll say there's this gold rush of passwordless the other year, where everything suddenly had to be passwordless, and I think we kind of jumped the gun, or some companies jumped the gun a little bit. The infrastructure is there now. The technology is prevalent. Like I was saying, FIDO is in pretty much every computing device we have now, which is really good. So yeah, the passwordless has to become the default, or phishing resistance, I should say. We often conflate the two terms. Phishing resistant does not necessarily mean passwordless, and passwordless does not necessarily mean phishing resistant. But if we can make sure that if we are talking passwords that it's definitely phishing resistant, then we'd protect ourselves a lot better. So yes, I think it has to become the default. And that means there's a lot of onus on vendors like ourselves and the technology stacks to make sure it's easy for the users, because if it's not easy, that's a big barrier to adoption of these things. If we can show the users how it helps them, how it protects them, then I think that accelerates that acceptance. If we can have people saying, why can't I use this? We do have that kind of thing. We do see in some customers where if one group of users get a YubiKey and passwordless, and then you see other groups, you say, well, why can't we do that? Is that better? Why can't we do an adoption? So, yeah, as strategists, I think our job internally is to evangelize, is to show to the businesses why this is good for the business, why this is good for the users, why we can do this easily now. It isn't rip and replace. It isn't putting a new layer of abstraction in. We have the technology. We can start small. We can build it. We can get people saying, oh yeah, this is really nice. So, and that's the same for anything. I mean, but I think the onus is, especially in the security field, that we need to get the businesses involved in being proactively protecting themselves and their users and getting that knowledge there. And that's what our job is to do, to show them that we can do this. This works. Look, here you are. You can go out. There's plenty of case studies of people doing this. There's the Google things. There's other customers out there who will talk about these things, and help the business. So that's where, and that's our normal thing of doing. So that's where I think our role is. So that in breaking it down, making it easy to understand, showing the benefits and showing that it's doable. Not that, going to the moon would be lovely, but we need to show you can actually do it, and we do it easily.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you again for joining us today, Nic.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning into Security Strategist. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, follow at EM360 Tech on X and LinkedIn, and visit our website for more expert opinions.